Good morning and welcome to SportsBeat Live, our weekly conversation, usually with the Chiefs. But the Chiefs aren't playing this weekend, so we thought we would use this time to talk some college basketball with that season on the doorstep. Let me tell you who is here today to help us break down college hoops in the Sunflower State. We got Gary Bedore and Jesse Newell, who cover KU. Hey, guys, how you doing?
Good, Blair. How about you?
Great,
Doing
Blair.
fine. And Taylor Eldridge covers the Wichita State Shockers for the Wichita Eagle and Kansas City Star. Taylor, how's it going?
Hey, doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Sure. And we're going to be joined a little bit later by Kellis Robinett, who covers Kansas State for the Star and the Eagle as well. So those of you who have joined us for Chiefs conversations, you know how this works. We will join us with your questions and comments. We'll get to as many of them as we can. And we are here to talk college hoops. It's coming. There's no stopping it. There was stopping it back in March. It came to a halt. I was going to ask you guys where you were, what you were doing when the college hoop tournaments ceased. I think Gary and Jesse and I were at then Sprint Center waiting for the Big 12 tournament to continue. But Taylor, had the American Conference tournament started, or it was in Fort Worth, I believe.
Yeah, it was, and yeah, it was. I remember on Wednesday night watching I was actually watching the Thunder Jazz game about to start, and then it didn't start at all, and that was right when the coronavirus. That was basically the first major event. Was the Rudy Gobert test, and that kind of created the snowball effect. And when I saw that, I texted, because WSU wasn't going to play until Friday in Fort Worth. So we were we were going to leave on Thursday, but like once I saw that, I texted my photographer who I was going to go with, and I was like, I don't think this thing's going to happen. Like if the NBA is canceling their season, I don't think there's any way the NCAA is able to, play. So I texted him. I said, let's just lay low and let's not leave tomorrow. Let's see what happens. And sure enough, I think it was like an hour or two before the first scheduled game on Thursday, the American was one of the several conferences that pulled the plug on their conference tournament. So yeah, we were right about to leave for Fort Worth for the conference tournament, and I ended up not going. So some WSU people had actually already been in Fort Worth, so they made the drive all the way down there, and then obviously didn't get to see any basketball. So we were lucky enough to not have to drive all the way back. So
had you guys, hey Jesse, Gary, had you guys already come over to Kansas City that morning?
Yes, we were at Sprint Center, now T-Mobile, and we walked. When we got the word, we walked over to the KU hotel. They were up at the Marriott a few blocks away, and we waited to talk to Bill Self before they got on the bus to go back. So we were just waiting for the KU game and got the word and headed up to the team hotel where we talked to Self briefly.
I'll never forget standing in line in the media entrance to get into T-Mobile Center, and the media entrance was right next to a player's family entrance. So just one door over, and Texas and Texas Tech were playing in that first game at 11:30 tip. I think Kansas was going to play the winner, or the Kansas game was next, right? They were going to play the second game that day. And there was a mother of a Texas player on her phone, and she was nodding her head and whispering to the people around her, "There's not going to be a game today. There's not going to be a game today." So this was like 45 minutes before we knew anything. And finally, Bob Bowlesby had the press conference in T-Mobile Center that no hoops that day. But we didn't know then that the NCAA tournament was off. We were still thinking that night that, maybe they'll still have the NCAA tournament, but won't let media in or won't let fans in, and they'll just have to make some kind of arrangement. But I think it was the next day, right? It was Friday, because we're talking about the conference tournaments being canceled on Thursday. I think Friday was the day of the NCAA tournament announcement. No NCAA tournament, which was what a blow for Kansas, right? 28-3, the number one team in the country. The would have been the overall number one seed. I don't know if they would have lost that, no matter what the results of the Big 12 tournament are going to be. But that spins us forward to this season, and a lot has happened in the off season, even in a country that has been slowed and in some cases shut down by the pandemic. And Taylor, we're going to start with you because the big news in college basketball nationally is in your town and what's going on with Greg Marshall. And you've been all over this story and have in fact we should probably alert our viewers that you might have to pop off in case something else breaks. But how about bringing us up to speed on where things stand with Greg Marshall? Just to kind of take us through a little bit of a timetable and where things stand now.
Yeah, so basically the big story came back in October. I think it was October 9th when Stadium published the results of its 6-month investigation by Jeff Goodman. He talked to Shaquille Morris, a former Wichita State basketball player, and he alleged that Coach Greg Marshall had hit him twice in the head during a practice, and he also said that he also alleged that he saw Marshall put his hands around an assistant coach's throat. And so those are the two major allegations. There's also, things that have come up about him using demeaning language, just insults that just cross the line. And that's come from a lot of, from former WSU players, from former Winthrop players. But it's also important to note that, there's still a lot of former players from Greg Marshall that will go to bat for him, and they swear by his coaching style, and that's from Winthrop and Wichita State. So, it's kind of been a mixed basket. And so basically that story came out. WSU had actually already hired a law firm to conduct an independent investigation. Our records show that they hired them on August 25th, so well before that story actually dropped. But so this is almost a 3-month thing now. And it's starting to heat up, and Jeff Goodman and then CBS Sports, they reported with a source that WSU is expected to part ways with Greg Marshall, and they said as soon as Wednesday. Obviously Wednesday came and went, nothing happened. From what my sources have told me, they've said they've heard that thing. They've heard that it might be trending that way, but nobody could tell me 100% like that was the fate is sealed. WSU's decision's already made. So right now I cannot report that, Greg Marshall will not be the basketball coach at WSU, but there are a lot of rumblings out there that will be the case. But as of right now, he's still the coach. He has not, resigned. He has not been fired, as far as I know, and as far as what my sources have told me. So yeah, it's just an ongoing thing now. And it's just crazy that, this is, less than 2 weeks before the start of the season now. So to have the timing of this too, that just kind of throws a wrench in everything too, because, the players now, they weren't involved in any of this stuff. And now, their coaches, amid a controversy like this at the, in an investigation, and they might not have their coach, 2 weeks before the regular season. So it's just, it's a crazy deal. And it's just going to be an hour by hour thing. And I'm expecting some news by the end of the week, but we'll see.
Hey, Taylor, this is kind of tying into KU now because there's been some reports out there that potentially Danny Manning could have his name end up there. And potentially, if this does go through, there could be some candidates you would think that would want to jump in right away. So coming from another program might be kind of a difficult thing, especially if, like you said, 2 weeks until the season. So any thoughts on that front on who they might be looking to? I know there's a lot of people in the Wichita State tree as well, the Chris Jans types that might potentially be interested, but just any initial thoughts? I know it's putting the cart before the horse, but any initial thoughts on where Wichita State might turn if Greg Marshall is not the coach anymore? Yeah,
exactly. And I think there's just so much to sort out before we even get to there. That's like you said, it's obviously you're looking down the line, and like I reported, there's as of now, nothing has happened with Greg Marshall. But if that was to happen, the next question would be, what happens with athletic director Darren Boatwright? He would be the decision maker in that. And there's a lot of people who have said that, if Greg Marshall gets fired, then that might mean that, Darren Boatwright also gets fired. So we'll have to see about that. From what I've been told, I've heard conflicting things about that as far as Darren's job. And but it's just completely up in the air, and that would be something where it's an interim president right now at Wichita State, so they don't have a real president, and then the athletic director's job in jeopardy, and then the men's basketball coach job in jeopardy. So it would be a big question mark who would even hire the next basketball coach. So if this thing does go down, if Greg does lose his job, you'd have to think that they promote from within. Isaac Brown is the most experienced assistant coach, but then we'd have to see if Coach Marshall goes down, then who goes down with him too. Like it'll be interesting to see like how much fallout there is if they do indeed end up firing him. And but yeah, I mean, I think Chris Jans, that's probably the top of the wish list for WSU fans. He's obviously has ties to Marshall, went to New Mexico State, and has just been turning them into a mid-major powerhouse. And obviously with stuff that's going down in New Mexico, they can't even practice. They don't even know if they'll be able to play this season. So who knows? Maybe Jans is able to make that jump, right away, because they might not be able to play regardless. And obviously WSU fans, they have so many good memories with him on the sidelines. I think he'd be number one at the top of the list. Greg Heyer is another one who's now at East Tennessee State as an assistant coach. Same thing. He was here during, the glory years at WSU as an assistant coach. You mentioned Danny Manning. That one kind of surprised me. That one kind of came out of left field, but I mean, the report said that WSU has reached out to him. Everyone I've talked to was pretty bewildered by that, because it's like, who would be reaching out to any coach right now? Because everyone's job is kind of up in the air, and like the acting president's not going to be reaching out to Thad Matta or Danny Manning. So it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, I would say Jan's number one. Greg Heyer would also be up there. Maybe Earl Grant at College of Charleston. He's another former Marshall assistant. But there's also a chance that WSU, if they fire Greg Marshall, they might just say, hey, we don't want to go down his coaching tree, and we just want to go clean slate, go in another direction. But there are a lot of really, really good candidates from the Greg Marshall coaching tree. So a lot of good options, and it'll be definitely interesting to see. But I wouldn't expect them to make a hire until next spring at the earliest, just because it's so close to the season. I think they're just going to have to go with probably Isaac Brown as the interim for this season, if that does happen.
All right, Kellis Robinett has joined us. Kellis, how you doing?
Good. Sorry I'm late, fellas.
No, happy to have you here. Hey, Taylor, before we wrap it up, at least this topic with Wichita State, just based on your reporting, there were a couple of things I think are important to bring out. One of which, Greg Marshall's not with the team right now, correct? He's not coaching the team. Is he at practices?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the question mark, is that he was coaching last week in practices, and then on Monday and Tuesday he was absent from the practices, and then Wednesday they did not practice. So I had confirmed that with the university, and then I asked them, was that because he's suspended with pay, and they would not directly answer that question. They just said that he was taking some personal time off. So it's unclear. I mean, I know the easy assumption is just to jump and say, okay, he's not the coach anymore. But with the coronavirus stuff going on, it is entirely possible that he is maybe in quarantine. I've been told by a source that there is a person on the staff that does have the virus right now. So it is entirely possible that is just because he's quarantining. But that is kind of unusual. I mean, obviously 2 weeks before the start of the season, I don't think he's willingly, taking time off, but it very well could be that he's just in quarantine. But yeah, no one is confirming that. Okay.
And just a couple of the quick points. The incidents that have been alleged occurred in one in 2015, 2016, one in 16-17 season. Nothing before or after, at least in terms of your reporting, based on the similar type of incidents. And I also find it, and you talked to players who corroborated, people who were on those teams corroborated the incidents, the punching Shaq in the back of the head, and then the assistant coach who was choked. The other thing that I find interesting is of the most famous of Wichita State players over the last decade, the Ron Bakers, the Fred Van Vliets, they haven't publicly commented on this, and I don't know what that says or what to read into that, but I just find it interesting that the support has been from the community, ad in the Wichita Eagle, a lot of social media support, but nothing from the players who we know best from those teams.
Yeah, and and it's also important to point out that all three of those guys were there for at least one of the incidents. So, it's and that's been the common theme, is that every player that has come out in support of Greg Marshall, which has been plenty, they were all before that time period. Most of them were early in his Wichita State days and back in Winthrop. So no player from the 2015-16 or the 16-17 teams, like you said, when the two physical alleged assaults occurred, no player from those teams has said anything. Some of them have actually come out on social media and kind of hinted that they did happen. And then, like you said, I've been able to independently confirm with 5 different players that the Shack punch happened, and then 8 different players on the 16-17 team that the Lindstedt hands around the throat and squeeze incident also occurred. So, the players are telling me that these things happen. So, it's just going to come down to what they told the investigators. And, back when this first broke, that was the big question, was that a lot of the players were not talking to the investigators because they felt like, it was a firm hired by WSU. And from what they thought that, Marshall just had WSU in their pocket. So they didn't think it was going to be a fair, unbiased investigation. So not very many of them talked to the investigators to begin with. I think that might have changed when Coach Marshall came out with his statement and completely denied ever, striking a player or putting his hands on a colleague. Just came out and outright denied it. And I think that kind of spurred the former players to come out and talk to the investigators. And it'll be interesting to see what plays out. Like I said, I've been told that, we're going to have a resolution here pretty soon. It's just going to be an hour by hour thing. And I'm sure a lot of WSU fans will be checking Twitter and refreshing for updates.
Yeah. Okay, let's before we go to some actual previews of seasons and teams, let's just get a quick update on the off-court news at Kansas, where the Jayhawks are. We know that they are the subject of NCAA investigation. It has gone to the independent panel. They are considering the Kansas case right now, the multiple level 1 violations alleged by the NCAA. So, Jesse, how about just giving us a kind of a quick update on where things stand and where they might be going? And I know it's nobody knows the timetable when dealing with the NCAA.
Well, it's difficult. Yeah. Just a quick update on this is that there aren't many updates, and it's going to be difficult to know how the process plays out because this process hasn't played out yet before with the independent panel. But yeah, that's the big elephant in the room for this entire season, is basically what's going to happen with Kansas when the word drops from that independent panel and a punishment comes for Kansas and its 5 level 1 violations alleged by the NCAA. So what we know about it, I've talked to kind of the chair of the committee with that. And after the last thing that they said, which was basically that KU had been accepted into that new independent panel, they're not going to have any public proclamations until there is a resolution. And so behind the scenes, there's going to be, a group that looks into the process, a group that potentially changes up KU's notice of allegations, and then they're going to have a hearing. And so we don't know how coronavirus affects this. We don't know about the timeline exactly because this hasn't played out. We also know that there's other schools, Memphis, NC State, that are already in this panel as well. So maybe some of those that went in before Kansas, their cases will be done sooner, maybe not. But I think we can probably safely assume end of 2020, which is kind of what we're getting to right now, or early 2021, there's going to be some sort of announcement that comes out and says, hey, this is what Kansas gets. Remember, as part of this new thing, Kansas cannot formally appeal this through the NCAA. whatever the ruling is, but they could potentially go to a higher court if they feel like the ruling is too unfair. But it kind of leaves you in that little uncertain mode, because let's say this news broke in late January. If Kansas has any say at that point, I would assume that Bill Self would look at his players, know that they've been through 2/3 of a season, and want those guys to play out the rest of the season since they've already started this season. And if KU has any say, they'll probably want to push any sanctions off into the future. But if KU doesn't get a say in that, there is precedent for the NCAA in past years where if a team wants to take its postseason ban, or it's early enough that you can kind of take your postseason ban that year, or if it's 1 or 2 years, you could start your punishment right then. So that would be kind of something to follow. But unfortunately, right now for us, unless it's things that are leaked, which potentially could happen as well, this is going to be kind of a hush-hush process until it's settled. And that just leaves kind of KU's season and KU's more of the future of the program rather than the season. You would assume, again, if I was guessing, that this season will probably go off and KU will be able to play in the postseason this year and then serve whatever punishment afterward. But we're exactly clear on that. We're not exactly clear on a lot of things, but that still kind of looms as that gray cloud over the course of this season.
Okay, well, it's business as usual in a COVID-19 world, business as it can be, I guess, in the pandemic at Lawrence, Manhattan, and Wichita in terms of getting a team ready for a basketball season. First day of games, November 25th, so 2 weeks from yesterday. And Gary, KU number 6 in the preseason AP poll after finishing first last year. They lose Devon Dotson and Udoka Azubuike and Moss, the three-point shooter. They've got a lot of talent returning, and you and I talked about this recently, but let's go over again what let's put it this way. Who ends up being KU's scoring leader this year? Who were the double-digit figure scorers for Kansas?
Well, Self says he always, and we know, likes to play through the bigs. So David McCormack is supposed to be able to replace Doak's production and even drift outside a little bit for that 10-footer. Marcus Garrett, everyone says, has the ball in his hands the most of anybody as the point guard, so he could be, a double-digit scorer. Then you've got Christian Brown, who's supposed to be the star of the preseason camp, who can hit a three, and he might be they might go to him a lot for threes because he can make them. Ochai Agbaji, Self says, has improved his shot quite a bit and figures to be, they really need him to emerge this year, his junior year. They've got a batch of wings to work with, really not many bigs. Mitch Lightfoot will come off the bench as a big, but they've got all these wings like Tristan and Aruna, Tyon Grant Foster. Jalen Wilson has improved his body, I guess, and has really improved according to everybody. So they have, Self said he could play up to, I think he was saying 6 perimeter guys. So they keep saying that it'll be scoring by committee. Don't know what Jesse thinks, if anybody will take over and be the 16 to 20 point man. I would guess Bill would love for that to be McCormack.
Yeah, it's interesting with KU's roster because David McCormack is a guy who's never been hesitant to shoot, and now he's going to get a lot more playing time. So I guess the question becomes, will he be an efficient scorer, and then will that be the way that Kansas wants their offense to go? Because as Gary said, his strength is more away from the basket, kind of those spot-up shots 10 to 12 feet, whereas Bill Self's offense is usually predicated around throwing the ball over the top, getting a big man the ball 2 feet from the rim, and then he dunks it or lays it in. So David will probably want to take that role, but I guess it'll be up to the KU coaching staff whether he gets that role. Because, again, like I said, even when he's been on the bench in future or in past years, it's been interesting because he's never been afraid to shoot. I mean, he shoots as much as about anybody on a per-minute basis, but it'll be a matter of if those shots are efficient. Now, the good news for him is he's a really good free throw shooter. So if he can kind of battle inside and get to the line, that's a great possession for Kansas if you can end up with 2 free throws from a big man who shoots about 81%. But Gary went over all the suspects there. Marcus Garrett's going to have the ball in his hands a bunch. He's going to play a bunch of minutes, so he's a candidate, and he's great scoring with his right hand on drives. Ojai Abaji, if he emerges, he did a great job of playing into his role last year where it was really Doak and Dotson's show. He didn't have to be a big-time scorer. Now KU might need him to be that. And then kind of the wild card is Christian Brown. We know if you can hit an open three-pointer and then also do that off the dribble on the move, it's a really dangerous weapon. We've seen Devontae Graham do that in the NBA and really take over where, hey, that's really tough to guard. If you can hit deep threes, threes off the dribble, threes off the pick and roll. And if KU kind of wants to really revolutionize what it does, which Bill Self has done a lot in the last couple of years, both offensively and defensively, Christian Brown could be a big piece of that because it's really difficult to guard a guy who can hit a three when he's moving around, much like Christian Brown can.
Kellis, I was going to ask you to identify a Kansas State player who might be able to come off the pace and surprise us as a a borderline all-conference candidate. But when I look at K-State's roster, that's like anybody, right? I mean, there's just only one or two established guys on this roster, full of newcomers, and it's as if Bruce Weber's starting over with this team.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think about, but the only guy still standing from the teams that won a Big 12 championship and made it to the Elite Eight in very recent years is Mike McGurl. Everybody else is gone. He's the only guy on this team with the championship ring, even though it happened, like I said, 2 years ago. So a lot of turnover in Manhattan, and we've seen it before. It happened when they ran off Marcus Foster and a bunch of those guys and replaced them with Dean Wade, Kamau Stokes, and Barry Brown. And things actually worked out pretty good for them that time around. They built things up, got to that Elite Eight, won a Big 12 championship. So now we're going to see if Bruce Weber can do it again. But they actually have even more new guys coming in this season. Last time it was 7 or 8. This time it's 9. So outside of McGurl, there's just a lot of question marks. Who's going to score? Who's going to start? Who's going to hit threes? Without seeing him practice, it's really hard to say. But if you're going to identify one guy like you asked who could maybe take on a bigger role this season, who we haven't heard from a lot in the past, the two guys I would look for are maybe Dejuan Gordon, who did play some last season, and Bruce Weber went out of his way to say he was becoming a leader as a freshman. His stats weren't all that great, but you know what? If he could develop more of an outside shot, he could really be in contention for their leading scorer this season. Then the other guy I would keep an eye on is Selton Miguel, a very heralded freshman, maybe one of the more talented freshmen they've ever had come through Manhattan. The tricky part is he plays the same position basically as Mike McGurl and Dejuan Gordon. So minutes might be hard to come by, but he's a good scorer. He can get to the basket. He's a guy I'll be looking for off the bench.
Let me ask you about a couple of newcomers, though, Kellis. How about Nigel Pack? Do we pencil him to start at point guard as a freshman?
I think so. It'll be either him or Rudy Williams at point guard, taking over for what they've had in the past. And I think that'll be, if we were allowed in to watch preseason position battles this season, that would be the one I'll be watching, just because somebody new has to play point guard. It's either going to be Nigel Pack, the 4-star freshman, or Rudy Williams, a little bit more experienced junior college guy. I lean Pack in this situation because I think he's a little bit better scorer. He's the first guy they took in their last recruiting class. They really, really wanted him. He's from Indianapolis and kind of surprisingly didn't get a look from Indiana or Purdue. But Bruce Weber has got a lot of roots and recruiting ties in that Midwest area. And when he saw him play, he just couldn't believe it, thought he had to get in as quick as possible and lock him down before these other schools realized what they were missing on. So they're very high on him. I think he's probably the answer there. But again, not to keep comparing things to the past year, but I think you're going to see a lot like that first year when they were rebuilding 4 or 5 years ago, when they split time between Kamau Stokes as a freshman and Corby Irvin as a JUCO point guard. They're both going to play.
Okay. And I need a pronunciation guide for the UTEP transfer. Keyosi Izagu?
Oh, man, not even close. Casey. Believe it or not, his first name is Casey.
I'm going to write that down.
I was as stunned as anything. There are a lot of guys in this latest recruiting class that when I called them up on the phone to introduce myself, the first thing I had to say is, can you pronounce your name for me? Because I don't even want to attempt it. But yeah, Casey, Kaosi somehow is Casey. Casey is Iglu. Yeah, he's kind of the poster boy for their new front court this season. They've replaced pretty much every single player in there. You're not going to see McCall Mayween anymore. And then they had 3 or 4 guys who'd just been on the bench forever, not really playing much, that finally transferred out. And now they've used more size, a lot more shocking ability with him and Dejuan Carlton Lingard and some other players who were all 6'11" or taller. I think it'll slow a bit on offense, but it seems like these guys are better finishers than they've had in the past, and they're much better shot blockers. So I think that's something that maybe they utilize a little bit more with some zone looks, something that Bruce Weber doesn't love to do. But if it keeps a guy down near the basket as a rim protector, I think they'll try it. And Casey, when he was at UTEP, he led him in blocks, was a really good rebounder. He's got 2 parts of his game down. It's just a question of, can he bring the offensive round to match it?
Okay. And Taylor, a lot of newcomers at Wichita this year too, right? Let me ask you this before we get into the team. Were they had some work to do to get into the tournament last year, didn't they? They would have to have had a good conference tournament, and they had such a great start. I remember they beat Oklahoma State, back-to-back games last season, but a tough finish, and had probably put themselves on the wrong side of the bubble.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to see. I mean, it just depended on who you looked at. On some projections, they were on the right side of the bubble. They were one of the first 4 teams in. But I think if you look at bracket matrix, they were actually, one of the unanimous. I think they were not even in the first 4. They were pretty clearly in. So, but I think Luinardi had them out, and Jerry Palm had him out. So yeah, it would have been right there on the bubble. I think they would have had to beat UConn in that first game to feel good about things. And UConn gave them a really good game pretty much every game. So it would have been a good matchup. But yeah, I mean, it was like you said. I mean, they started off just on fire. They looked like a top 25 team. They had all these sophomores, and it looked like, man, the future is so bright with such a young core. And then, yeah, it just kind of fell apart there at the end of the season. And it's so weird because you say fall apart, and they still could have been in the NCAA tournament. They still had, if you look at just if I told you before the season they were going to end, 23 wins, top half of the conference, a lot of WSU fans would have taken that. That's right around where we thought they would be before the season. But, when they were 14-1 and ranked 16th in the country or whatever it was, you would have liked a lot better finish than that. So yeah, it was setting up to be right there on the bubble. They would have probably had to win that first game in the conference to feel good about things.
Okay, so let's go down their roster real quick. What they've got some guys, some returning scorers back, right? A couple starters and Etienne. Who are they going to lean on this year, even without knowing who the coach might be when the season?
Yeah, it's and then they obviously had the mass exodus this last spring too. I mean, they lost Eric Stevenson, Jamarius Burton, Grant Sherfield. All 3 of those guys were underclassmen, supposed to be building blocks for the future. Showed a lot of really good signs, especially JB. I thought he was going to be a really good, really good player. And so they lost 3 really, really talented players, and Noah Fernandez too was a nice little spark off the bench, and he was just a freshman as well. So, that sounds like a lot, but really, they were so deep last year that they were able to, absorb those losses, and they still have like a pretty salty starting 5. I mean, Tyson Etienne is back for his sophomore season. He had a really, really good freshman year. He's a sharpshooter, one of the best shooters in the conference. Dexter Dennis put his name in the NBA draft. He came back for his junior year. They're going to be looking for him to take that jump. So far, he's just been right around, that 8, 9, 10 points per game scoring. And I think they're going to look for him to take that big jump to become, a 13, 14, 15 point a game scorer. Trey Wade is back for his senior year as the stretch 4. He's really solid, a good defender, good rebounder, plays bigger than he is. So he's solid. And then at center, they're going to have a lot of production to replace in Jaime Echenique. But, they have a 3-headed attack like they usually do. Morris Udeze came back. Isaiah Porbert Chandler is back. They're both juniors. And then they have a redshirt freshman, Josephat Bilal. He's just been banged up, and they really love his upside, but he just cannot stay healthy. But Udeze and Porbert Chandler have both taken pretty big strides. So I think they're feeling good about center. And then they have Alterique Gilbert coming in as the UConn grad transfer at point guard. And they think he's been, lights out. Everybody I've talked to in the program has said this guy is the real deal. He's looking like one of their best players in practices. So that starting five they feel really, really good about. But, everything else is just a major question mark. A lot of JUCOs coming in, 3 pretty talented freshmen, but I don't know if they're going to be able to contribute right away. So just a lot of question marks on the bench. But, WSU, they feel like they can be right back around, where they were at the end of last season, low 20s wins and, right there on the bubble of the NCAA tournament.
Okay. So much uncertainty, though, with the Shockers and what's going to happen with Greg Marshall. Great information today, you guys. I want to end this by asking each of you what you think the percentage chance is of the team that you cover playing its entire regular season schedule. We know that in college football right now, what is it? 4 of the 7 SEC games have been called off for Saturday, including Missouri's game against Georgia at Columbia. College basketball has had more than a half a year to prepare for this season and prepare for this season in a pandemic. I know the numbers are trending in the wrong direction right now, but let's take a stab at this percentage chance of the team that you cover playing its entire regular season schedule. Jesse, let's start with you.
I guess I'll go optimistic and say 50-50. There's just so many more challenges with basketball, and I hate to end on a sad note that this sort of is, but I will say this: I'm really excited to see basketball again. I mean, I know Taylor kind of is the same way, where you like to dive into some of the X's and O's and see what teams are scheming and how they're using certain players. We just talked about Christian Brown, David McCormick, all that sort of drama that comes together in a season. I'm just ready to see how it plays out, and hopefully this can be pushed to the side. I think the problem with college basketball is obviously the big problem, which is in college football, if you have 5 or 10 guys that you can quarantine on their own and keep them away, you can still play your game. It's going to be a lot more challenging in basketball if you have 12 or 13 guys on your roster and 1 or 2 of them gets it. You probably have to sit out for a couple of weeks. And with some of the tracing, procedures that are out there, it's going to be difficult. So I guess optimistically 50-50, but like I said, whenever they get these games in, I'm looking forward to seeing how these teams react and play and the things that they do and the guys that emerge, especially for these teams. It seems like a lot of unknowns for K-State, Wichita State, but hopefully the virus will not get in the way, but I think it would be a little bit naive to think that that's going to happen.
Yeah, and Gary, 1,500 people in Allen Fieldhouse for home games this year. That's, boy, what a sight that's going to be. Nobody's ever seen that, but you as optimistic as Jesse on that?
Well, I'd say 10% because the latest, it all changes day to day, week to week. But I read yesterday somewhere that President Biden is that his leading expert is thinking about a president-elect 4 to 6 week shutdown in January of the whole country if this keeps trending the wrong way. So this changes so much, but the latest stuff I've read is back to the shutdown mode, and this is really bad. Hospitals are all filling up. So if this does spike over the winter, how are teams not going to have one guy turn up positive? And from what I've read and heard, one guy in the tier 1 group shuts down the whole team for 2 weeks. And then it takes a week to get back in shape for the team. So that's almost 3 weeks off of schedule. As of yesterday's news, I predict 10% chance to complete a full schedule.
Right. Hey, and keep in mind that basketball builds in more flexibility with its schedule than football does, right? If you lose you might be able to stack some games later in the season. But anyway. All right, Taylor, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm pretty pessimistic that they're going to get every single game in. I would be down there, maybe I want to say 0% because WSU they are, from what I've been told, they are dead set on playing in this tournament in South Dakota, despite South Dakota being on the travel quarantine list in Kansas. So if they play in this tournament, they will have to quarantine. There's no way around it for 14 days, upon the return, which they have 2 games in that 14-week span. And then the third game is on the first day right after that. So obviously they wouldn't play in that. Like Gary said, you can't practice. So you'd need at least a couple of days of practice. So I don't know. It's a weird deal. I think, they haven't even put out their conference schedule yet. So I'm interested to see if, some conferences have done pretty, creative things where they're just going to play back. They're going to play the same opponent twice on back-to-back days at one location, just get 2 games in back-to-back. So maybe the American does something creative like that, but man, I can't see like both Gary and Jesse both pointed out, it's just entirely different for basketball. If one guy gets it, there's just such fewer members of the team than football that could create problems. So I'm skeptical that they get every single game in, but hopefully, they can get most of the regular season in, and we can play NCAA tournament in March.
There you go. And Kellis, what's become of the Little Apple Invitational? Is that still on?
It's still on, but right now they only have 3 teams playing in it. South Dakota State was supposed to be team number 4, and they bailed. They found a better tournament somewhere else and said, we're just going to go do that instead. So right now, Kansas State, Colorado, and Drake are still in. Kansas State's supposed to open with Drake and then play Colorado. We talked to Bruce Weber later today, so I'm going to ask if they found a 4th team.
Or do a round robin,
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, why not? It's not a true tournament anyway.
Well, WSU should drop out and just play in that, so they don't have to leave Kansas.
Well, that's the perfect scenario right there. But it's been interesting, even when like Kansas State finally put out their full basketball schedule a week or 2 ago, and they had a Zoom call with Bruce, and he comes out and he just says, I just got to tell you, none of this is set in stone. I wouldn't even say it's written in ink. This could change. I doubt we get it. A lot of these games in, so. That right there makes you think that the odds of them playing every single game is extremely low. But, I hope they get creative as the season goes on. If games get canceled, why not just set up some type of virtual horse event or free throw contest, dunk contest, let people judge it and win and lose games that way. That's how they get the season in right there.
There you go. It'd have to be virtual because nobody's going to be allowed in the building at that point. So,
well, yeah, I mean, you could have K-State versus OU. They're just on their own home courts, watching each other on Zoom make shots. Say, all right,
me and Jesse can come up with an analytical test, and if you have you're driving to the basket and you're guarded. Do you put up the layup or do you kick out for the open corner 3?
You get
answers the right questions, they win.
Yep, Marcus Garrett, you took the 12-foot jumper. Only 0.8 points per possession for you on that possession. Sorry, man.
Sorry.
All right, guys. Great conversation. Thanks to Taylor, to Kellis, to Jesse, and Gary, and to our producer, Beth Welsh, who does a great job every week with us. Guys, we'll do it again some other time. Have a good morning, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thank you.
All right. See you guys.